Sorry, Ms. Mickey just texted me something and I had to stop and answer her. So, you are not going into the gooseberry garden, said the ant, changing the subject. Why not? Demanded Nicholas. Because you are in disgrace, said the ant loftily. Loftily meaning she definitely sees him as way beneath her and she's the adult and she's the better person, as we've already been told a couple of times in the beginning. Nicholas did not admit the flawlessness of the reasoning. He felt perfectly capable of being in disgrace and in a gooseberry garden at the same moment. His face took on an expression of considerable obstinacy. It was clear to his aunt that he was determined to get into the gooseberry garden. Only, as she remarked to herself, because I have told him he is not to. So she tells him he's not allowed in the gooseberry garden, and she's sure, because she told him he can't do it, that he's going to try to get in there. Now, the gooseberry garden had two doors by which it might be entered, and once a small person like Nicholas could slip in there, he could effectually disappear from view amid the masking growth of artichokes, raspberry canes, and fruit bushes. The ant had many other things to do that afternoon, but she spent an hour or two in trivial gardening operations among flower beds and shrubberies, whence she could keep a watchful eye on the two doors that led to the forbidden paradise. She was a woman of few ideas with immense powers of concentration. That's an interesting paragraph. So she has other things she needs to do, but she knows that she set him up because he's going to want to get into that gooseberry garden and she's going to make it so he doesn't. So she's stationing herself in the gooseberry garden and doing trivial work in there just so she can catch him trying to get in. She's awful, isn't she? And it says, it's interesting, it says, she was a woman of few ideas. So the author is telling us she's not all that smart. But she has immense powers of concentration. So when she puts her mind to keeping him out of the garden, she's going to do whatever it takes. Nicholas made one or two sorties into the front garden. So a sortie is when soldiers leave a place of defense and go on the attack. So he's kind of moving in there into the garden, wriggling his way with obvious stealth of purpose towards one or other of the doors, but never able for a moment to avoid the ant's watchful eye. So he's trying to get in and she is watching him like a hawk. As a matter of fact, he had no intention of trying to get into the gooseberry garden, but it was extremely convenient for him that his aunt should believe that he had. It was a belief that would keep her on self-imposed sentry duty for the greater part of the afternoon. So what he's just done is he's made her think that he's trying to get in so that she's going to be on high alert and she's going to stay in the garden ready for him. But he has something else in mind. Having thoroughly confirmed and fortified her suspicions, Nicholas slipped back into the house and rapidly put into execution a plan of action that had long germinated in his brain. So he's had something that for a long time that he's wanted to do, and today he's figured out a way to make it happen. By standing on a chair in the library, one could reach a shelf on which reposed a fat, important-looking key. The key was as important as it looked. It was the instrument which kept the mysteries of the lumber room secure from unauthorized intrusion, which opened a way only for ants and such like privileged persons. So this boy wants to get into that lumber room and just look around and see what's in there, this big storage area. Nicholas had not had, and the kids are never allowed in there. Nicholas had not had much experience of the art of fitting keys into keyholes and turning locks. But for some days past he had practiced with the key of the schoolroom door. He did not believe in trusting too much to luck and accident. So what does that tell us? It tells us that he has this really well planned out. He's thinking ahead and he is putting his plan into action after much thought. The key turned stiffly in the lock, but it turned. The door opened, and Nicholas was in an unknown land, compared with which the gooseberry garden was a stale delight, a mere material pleasure. So in he goes, and what he has walked into is so much better than the gooseberry garden. Often and often, Nicholas had pictured to himself what the lumber room might be like, that region that was so carefully sealed from youthful eyes, and concerning which no questions were ever answered. It came up to his expectations. In the first place, it was large and dimly lit, one high window opening on to the forbidden garden being its only source of illumination. In the second place, it was a storehouse of unimagined treasures. The ant, by assertion, was one of those people who think that things spoil by use and consign them to dust and damp by way of preserving them. Doesn't that just sound like an adult, like this crotchety old ant, that she has all this stuff, but she doesn't want to use it because it could get ruined. So she keeps it in storage where it's safe, but never used. What's the point of that? It just tells us a little bit more about her. Such parts of the house as Nicholas knew best were rather bare and cheerless. But here there were wonderful things for the eye to feast on. First and foremost, there was a piece of framed tapestry. So a tapestry is like a thick piece of cloth that has a picture woven into it, usually a pretty detailed picture, that was evidently meant to be a fire screen. So this would have covered the front of the fireplace when it wasn't in use. Something interesting to look at. To Nicholas, it was a living, breathing story. He sat down on a roll of Indian hangings, glowing in wonderful colors beneath a layer of dust, and took in all the details of the tapestry picture. A man, dressed in the hunting costume of some remote period, had just transfixed a stag with an arrow. So on this tapestry, it's a scene of a hunter, and he's wearing his hunting clothes in some old period of time, something from the far past, and he has just transfixed a stag with an arrow. So he has an arrow pointed at a stag. A stag is a male deer. It could not have been a difficult shot because the stag was only 1 or 2 paces away from him. In the thickly growing vegetation that the picture suggested, it would not have been difficult to creep up to a feeding stag, and the 2 spotted dogs that were springing forward to join in the chase had evidently been trained to keep to heel till the arrow was discharged. So he's got 2 dogs with him out on his hunting expedition. That part of the picture was simple, if interesting. But did the huntsman see what Nicholas saw, that 4 galloping wolves were coming in his direction through the wood? So in the background of this picture, behind the hunter that the hunter can't see, there are 4 wolves coming toward him. There might be more than 4 of them hidden behind the trees. And in any case, would the man and his dogs be able to cope with the 4 wolves if they made an attack? The man had only 2 arrows left in his quiver, 2 arrows, and he might miss with one or both of them. All one knew about his skill in shooting was that he could hit a large stag at a ridiculously short range. Nicholas sat for many golden minutes revolving the possibilities of the scene. He was inclined to think that there were more than 4 wolves, and that the man and his dogs were in a tight corner. So we don't really know for sure if woven into this tapestry are 4 wolves, or if this is Nicholas's imagination, like bringing this story to life in his mind. Because a lot of this story is about the imagination, the beautiful imagination of a child. But there were other objects of delight and interest claiming his instant attention, so he turns away from the tapestry to what else is in this lumber room. There were quaint, twisted candlesticks in the shape of snakes, and a teapot fashioned like a china duck, out of whose open beak the tea was supposed to come. So he finds this teapot shaped like a duck, and when you pour the tea, it comes out of the beak of the duck. How dull and shapeless the nursery teapot seemed in comparison. So the one he's used to every day in the house part, boring compared to this cool thing. And there was a carved sandalwood box packed tight with aromatic cotton wool, and between the layers of cotton wool were little brass figures, hump-necked bulls and peacocks and goblins, delightful to see and to handle. Less promising in appearance was a large square book with plain black covers. Nicholas peeped into it and behold, it was full of colored pictures of birds. And such birds! In the garden and in the lanes when he went for a walk, Nicholas came across a few birds, of which the largest were an occasional magpie or wood pigeon. Here, in these pictures, here were herons and bustards, kites, toucans, tiger bitterns, brush turkeys, ibises, golden pheasants, a whole portrait gallery of undreamed of creatures. And as he was admiring the coloring of the mandarin duck and assigning a life history to it in his imagination, the voice of his aunt in shrill vociferation of his name came from the gooseberry garden without. She had grown suspicious at his long disappearance, and had leapt to the conclusion that he had climbed over the wall behind the sheltering screen of the lilac bushes. She was now engaged in an energetic and rather hopeless search for him among the artichokes and raspberry canes. So she realizes he hasn't been seen for a while trying to get into the gooseberry garden, and she's wondering what's going on. Did he come over the wall somehow? So she's searching around for him. Nicholas! Nicholas! She screamed. You are to come out of this at once. It's no use trying to hide there. I can see you all the time. Again, she's lying. It was probably the first time for 20 years that anyone had smiled in that lumber room. So he hears what's going on. He knows what's happening, and it makes him smile. Safely in the lumber room, nowhere near her. Presently, the angry repetitions of Nicholas's name gave way to a shriek and a cry for somebody to come quickly. Nicholas shut the book, restored it carefully to its place in a corner, and shook some dust from a neighboring pile of newspapers over it. Then he crept from the room, locked the door, and replaced the key exactly where he had found it. His aunt was still calling his name when he sauntered into the front garden. Who's calling? He asked. Me, came the answer from the other side of the wall. Didn't you hear me? I've been looking for you in the gooseberry garden, and I've slipped into the rainwater tank. Luckily, there's no water in it, but the sides are slippery and I can't get out. Fetch the little ladder from under the cherry tree. And Nicholas says, I was told I wasn't to go into the gooseberry garden, said Nicholas promptly. I told you not to, and now I tell you that you may, came the voice from the rainwater tank, rather impatiently. Your voice doesn't sound like Aunt's, objected Nicholas. You may be the evil one tempting me to be disobedient. Aunt often tells me that the evil one tempts me and that I always yield. This time I'm not going to yield. Don't talk nonsense, said the prisoner in the tank. Go and fetch the ladder. Will there be strawberry jam for tea? Asked Nicholas innocently. Certainly there will be, said the aunt, privately resolving that Nicholas should have none of it. So he asks, if I come in there and save you, will I get strawberry jam with dinner? And she says, certainly, even though to herself she's saying, absolutely not, he's not getting anything. Lying again. Now I know that you are the evil one and not Aunt, shouted Nicholas gleefully. When we asked Aunt for strawberry jam yesterday, she said there wasn't any. I know there are 4 jars of it in the store cupboard because I looked. And of course you know it's there, but she doesn't because she said there wasn't any. Oh, devil, you have sold yourself. So he's saying the evil one knows it's there, but the aunt, she thinks there isn't any. Oh man, he got her good with this one. There was an unusual sense of luxury in being able to talk to an aunt as though one was talking to the evil one. But Nicholas knew with childish discernment that such luxuries were not to be overindulged in. He walked noisily away, and it was a kitchen maid in search of parsley who eventually rescued the aunt from the rainwater tank. Tea that evening, the upper class English called dinner tea. Tea that evening was partaken of in a fearsome silence. The tide had been at its highest when the children had arrived at Jagborough Cove, so there had been no sands to play on, a circumstance that the aunt had overlooked in the haste of organizing her punitive expedition. So when the aunt came up with this on the fly, they get to go to the beach. She didn't think about where the tide might be when they were there, so they couldn't even play on the beach. The tightness of Bobby's boots had had disastrous effect on his temper the whole afternoon, and altogether the children could not have been said to have enjoyed themselves. The irony, right? Who did enjoy himself? The aunt maintained the frozen muteness of one who has suffered undignified and unmerited detention in a rainwater tank for 35 minutes. As for Nicholas, he too was silent, in the absorption of one who has much to think about. It was just possible, he considered, that the huntsman would escape with his hounds while the wolves feasted on the stricken stag. And that's the end of the story. Isn't it great? So here's this boy who found a way to have such a good time when he was supposed to be punished. And at the end, he's back in that lumber room he's thinking of the tapestry and where that story of the huntsman and the deer and the wolves could go. It's all about his imagination. It's a wonderful story with interesting things going on in it. We have obviously his curiosity, we have his creativity and his imagination. You don't see that much with the ant. I think it's saying a lot about children versus adults and how people, as they grow older, change and they lose that innocence and that beautiful sense of curiosity and imagination, and then they become a certain type of person when they're adults, not always very likable. And then, like I said, there's the irony, of course, of the other children who were supposed to go have a fun day at the beach, and they had a miserable time at the beach. So that's a different irony, is when something happens that's different than what you assume is going to happen. So you think of kids going to the beach, of course they're going to have fun. The irony that they did not have fun, and also the irony of the fact that the boy who was punished had a way better time. So that is the lumber room. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll read you another story another time.